No, don't click away, it's not as stupid as it sounds, I swear. Hello YouTube, 'tis I, RootNegativeOne, and to explain the idea for this video, I need to go back a little bit. So, a little while ago, I released this video on Dart, and I thought it was super cool, it got a lot of traction, I was super happy about it, and so I decided how cool would it be to do a collab with a pretty popular YouTuber. So, I reached out to Matt Lowne, and, well, he totally ignored me on all social medias that I could find, no response. So, in an effort to get his attention, I am going to be making one of his videos before he can, otherwise known as scooping, defined here. Now, the video I'm going to be scooping is based on his last KSP video. It's the one about colonizing in one launch. In this video, he sort of colonizes the entirety of Duna in one launch with a space station, like a base and a communication network, all of that. And he outlines in that video that the next video of his might be colonizing in one launch, but to Eve instead. And there are a few special things that he brings up, but basically what I did is I went and I downloaded his craft file for the Duna video, and I basically just recreated the exact same mission, except to Eve. Of course, a few modifications had to be made, which will be shown, of course, as I begin to unfold the base and the space station. I had to completely redo the entry module because, of course, Eve's atmosphere is ridiculous. I had to put those massive heat shields on it in order to protect it, and even then some stuff blew up. I added a completely different, surface ascent vehicle, so to get from Eve's surface to the orbit of Eve, to the space station, I built a Kraken drive craft, which he also sort of outlined in his video, and I also totally redid the launch vehicle and the transfer stage. Now, with that quick intro out of the way, I can finally start talking about what's on screen. So, at that entire launch I just did was probably the biggest, most difficult, well, it wasn't that bad, but it was definitely the biggest launch I've ever done. Those side boosters, the side boosters that were shown, were literally asparagus staged mammoth boosters. I've genuinely never built anything that big. It was insanity. So after that, it's just a nuclear stage with a battery of 8 nuclear engines that just gets us all the way to Eve, captured around Eve, circularized around Eve, inclination changes around Eve, all of that done with that nuclear stage. And so essentially my strategy with getting a circular equatorial orbit around Eve was to get a intersection with Eve's sphere of influence where my periapsis was roughly around the equator or the equatorial plane of Eve. And that way, when I captured into Eve's orbit, I could do a relatively inexpensive plane change at apoapsis just to bring that inclination down to 0. So at this point in the mission, I had already gotten my encounter with Eve, I was in the sphere of influence, and I was just planning out my first burn to get it, captured into an orbit. So this was a incredibly low thrust to weight ratio stage, and so the burn times were just absolutely egregious. It took a very long time. Apparently, I hadn't even noticed this until I was editing, but apparently I got most of the way there to Eve using only that Rhino and Aerospike stage. The reason I was using both Rhinos and Aerospikes was because a single Rhino engine ended up not having enough thrust to weight ratio for an orbital insertion into Kerbin, and so I just had to give it that little extra kick. And so, as I already talked about, here is that plane change at the apoapsis of Eve, and since the apoapsis is the least expensive place to do a plane change burn, this was pretty cheap and did not take that long. From there, it was just a matter of doing multiple burns at periapsis to bring that apoapsis down and make it mostly circular. At that point, I could then deploy the space station and land the base on Eve. As I'm circularizing this orbit, I just wanted to point out that in editing, I noticed how many times I said Eve in this video, and it's a sad amount of times. So I've got a challenge for you all. If you can count how many times I said Eve in this video and post it in the comments section and you're right, I'll pin ya! So if you've made it this far in the video, I assume that means it's because you're enjoying it. So please remember to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more of the same content. It lets me know what you like and it lets me make more videos and it really does help out the channel. So make sure to do that. And for the record, I just wanted to say that I do not dislike Matt Lowne. Like, I am a very big fan of Matt Lowne. He's my favorite KSP YouTuber, more or less, hence why I asked him in the first place. I thought this video would just be a little bit of a meme, a little bit of a funny. Please don't cancel me in the comment section. Also, remember to check out his video too, not just like my video. I want to give him credit for this as well. This is not my video idea at all. This is not my craft file. I've built a few things like the launch vehicle and added a few things to make it Eve compatible, but otherwise this is all Matt Lowne designed. And so now that that's over with, I can start talking about what's going on screen again. So I have managed to detach the base section from the space station section, and using that nuclear transfer stage, I'm just going to, you know, deorbit the entire craft and have it enter the atmosphere and land. I tried to aim sort of for the coast so that I could get, you know, the explodium seas with everything. Speaking of exploding, dang, that is about to blow up. That's not very good. Anyway, so yeah, but anyway, yeah, I didn't manage to land near the seas, is what I'm trying to say in a very long-winded explanation. So I tried to do this mission normally, like the way Matt Lowne did, in that he sort of, you know, unfolded the whole craft on the way down, and then used a Kerbal Engineer to strut everything together before touching down on the surface. The only trouble is that Eve has much higher gravity than Duna does, and so those little support struts are sort of way too heavy for the Kerbal Engineers on Eve. So I couldn't actually strut it all together, which led to some very unfortunate circumstances while landing, which is about to become very apparent. So first things first was to detach that rover. I didn't do it very elegantly, and then unfold the base, and then try to make a touchdown, but unfortunately, it started bouncing and the Kraken just, you know, absolutely ripped it to shreds. I tried to time warp to stabilize it, but, you know, nothing worked, and it would just rip itself to shreds every time. I tried to extend the piston to make it stop bouncing. I tried to auto strut it altogether. I tried so many different things. I just could not get it to work. So instead, what I opted to do is to just not extend the landing gear, and that way it wouldn't be totally bouncy and whatever and super annoying. So that ended up being a solution that worked. So just dropping that rover from the thing is very satisfying, I find, dropping that rover and having the parachutes extend at the last minute and everything. So here's just that unfolding of the base, and of course not extending those landing gear so that the Kraken doesn't totally rip it to shreds. I realized I was going to be landing right on top of the rover, so I sort of decided to quickly switch to it and drive out of the way before finally touching down with that base. And that was a very, very slow touchdown. Those vectors and all those parachutes were totally overkill, right? It was designed for Duna, I was about to say Venus, Duna, and I ended up doing it on Eve, which a much thicker atmosphere, so I really didn't need it. So just a really cool shot there of detaching the those vector landing stage, I guess. It's already gone now, but whatever. Also, that little inflatable airlock, Matt Lowne didn't have that. That was my addition, just because I think it looks cooler than whatever little thing he had on it. It was a little piece. So I realized that on the rover, there's no like ladders or anything, so there's no real way of getting a Kerbal into it, except for dropping a Kerbal down from above, which seemed to work just fine, I guess. And so as long as I park it really close, it seemed to work okay. And then just giving that rover a bit of a test drive, I wanted to go over to the heat shield I dropped, but the Kraken sort of just made it disappear. That was a little weird. So I went and I found this little volcanic rock, and I decided to scan it with the scanning arm. I think this is the first time I've ever actually used those little scanning arms from the DLC. They're really cool. Matt uses them all the time, and so I wanted to recreate. Well, I mean, it's his craft file, so of course I was going to recreate it. And anyway, just driving back to that base and getting the Kerbal out and beginning to, you know, sort of pack up the well, not pack up the base, but get ready to start doing the other portion of the mission, which is, of course, the space station. I just figured I'd quickly go ahead and test out all the functions of the base, which were that little scanner and, of course, the lights. But after that, it was more or less done, and I decided to bring out a Kerbal and plant a flag and do some quick science experiments. So there's that golf one. This is honestly one of my favorite things to do in the entire game. Just play golf on the surface of another planet. It's really cool looking. So yeah, that's what I've got. And of course, planting a flag, planting the mandatory flag. Everyone's got to do that. I've got my logo on it. And with that, there are so many science experiments left to do. So I needed to bring a scientist Kerbal from the orbiting space station down to the surface. So it was first a matter of unfolding the entire space station and then getting the lander, or the ascent vehicle, down to the surface. And I brought 2 scientists with me, I believe, maybe a scientist, 1 pilot, something like that. Anyway, with those Kraken drives, it's a very interesting experience to fly those Kraken drives. Having unlimited Delta V is a very strange thing that you very rarely experience in Kerbal Space Program. It meant I could do things like neglect heat shields and just use like sheer slowing down before entering the atmosphere. Kind of like a Falcon 9 does, to be honest. Falcon 9 doesn't have heat shields. Anyway, it also meant that I could like pinpoint land by just like flying around in the atmosphere, kind of like a plane, which is a little strange. I sort of just let it drop for the last little part of the descent phase, I guess. And sort of, it was a whole process to get it to pinpoint land. Pinpoint landing in atmospheres is never very easy. But actually having those Kraken drives and being able to fly around made it, bearable. Made it pretty good. I decided to land a little bit away from the base instead of right on top of it. I guess wouldn't want to do that. But anyway, with that touchdown, I decided to bring the rover over. That's another reason why I landed a little bit farther. It's so that I could actually use the rover to bring Kerbals back and forth from the base to the lander. So bringing that rover over, that is very difficult to say, rover over. Anyway, I realized that I had to like put the rover right underneath the hatch, and that worked for one of the Kerbals, but the other one I just could not get it to like go on the rover. So what I tried to just get that Kerbal, I don't know, over to the side and see if I could somehow glitch him on top. And I realized, yes, I can climb up those batteries and like glitch into the rover. And that ended up working. So that was a new way to get Kerbals from the surface to the rover, I guess. So now I can go ahead and set up these little science experiments. These are always really cool to set up on the surface. These little, I don't even know what they do. I've never done a science playthrough using those. So I usually just do them for aesthetics every so often, and there were a crap ton of them packed away in this base, courtesy of Matt Lowne. So I decided to set them up all next to each other with the base, with the rover. That's a beautiful shot for the thumbnail. I'm sure you guys have all seen that already. Anyway, so the next thing was to finally just demonstrate the ability of this craft to go from Eve's surface into Eve's orbit. So I got one pilot, Valentina Kerman, to get into the ascent craft and sort of demonstrate this craft's ability. Again, flying with unlimited Delta V is a very strange thing because I never really pick up velocity until way up in the high atmosphere. It sort of takes a very long time to get up to speed, which is just a very strange experience. Just to continue burning and burning and burning, even though you're not really getting yourself anywhere because you're fighting that air resistance, is a very strange thing. But then, of course, once you get out of the atmosphere, you can start building up speed incredibly fast. Like, it is ridiculous how much, like, G-force this thing actually has. It's a little bit insane, to be honest. And then it's just a matter of doing a very, very expensive Lowne lazy method. Everything with this Kraken drive is just very expensive just because I can, to be honest. It's a very cheap craft. So I got a little bit too excited with the Lowne method here, and I ended up smacking into the craft and sort of causing a bit of an explosion. I lost a few Kraken drives, but I still had enough to sort of dock, so I didn't really want to do it again. I hadn't quick saved in a while, so I was just like, fuck it. The entire space station was sort of a little bit wonky, so I sort of had to rearrange everything and sort of like see if I could get docked on just barely, and then time warp to stabilize it, and then re-extend all of those things. In the end, it's not broken. It still works. And so the last thing left to do, to be honest, is sort of just to deploy those relays into high orbits. Unfortunately, with Eve, I didn't really have enough delta V to get one into a polar orbit and one into an equatorial orbit, so both of them just ended up being in high equatorial orbits, which works just as well, to be honest. It's not a perfect solution, and it never will be a perfect solution. Well, it can be a perfect solution, but not really with two vessels. So with that, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and 'twas I, RootNegativeOne, signing out.